The industrial history of natural gas begins long before the arrival of drilling rigs, compressors, and treatment plants. It starts in the subsoil, in sedimentary basins that formed millions of years ago. In those ancient environments, remains of microscopic organisms, algae, plants, and organic matter accumulated and were buried under successive layers of mud, sand, and rock. Over enormous scales of time, pressure and temperature transformed that matter into hydrocarbons. Part of that transformation gave rise to oil, and another part generated gaseous mixtures dominated by methane, the main component of natural gas. That gas is not usually found in a large empty cavern as is often imagined. In reality, it remains trapped within microscopic pores of sedimentary rocks, held under impermeable layers that prevent its escape to the surface. Sometimes it appears associated with oil. In other cases, it is found in reservoirs dominated almost entirely by gas. And in recent decades, low permeability formations have also been exploited, such as shales and schists, where the gas remains locked in much more compact, rocky structures. Before drilling, the industry needs to precisely locate those accumulations. To do so, it combines geology, geophysics, and digital modeling. Specialized teams study the shape of the basins, the type of rock, the thermal maturity of the organic matter, and the possible presence of structural traps. One of the most important tools is seismic. Through controlled vibrations generated on the surface, waves are sent that pass through the subsoil and bounce off the different geological layers. Sensors distributed over large areas record those bounces and allow for the construction of three-dimensional images of the deep terrain. Thanks to this work, engineers can estimate where it is convenient to drill and what geological risks exist before mobilizing heavy machinery. When a field proves promising, the visible phase of the operation begins. The ground is prepared, access roads are installed, as well as electrical systems, tanks, pumps, safety zones, and finally, the drilling rig. That structure concentrates an enormous amount of mechanical power. Its mission is to open a well capable of crossing hundreds or thousands of meters of rock formations under extreme conditions. Drilling is performed with a bit located at the end of a drill string. While the bit crushes the rock, a drilling fluid circulates continuously to cool the system, carry away fragments, and stabilize the well walls. This fluid, known as drilling mud, is essential for maintaining control. It not only transports rock cuttings to the surface, but also helps balance subsoil pressure. If that pressure is not handled correctly, the well can become unstable. For this reason, each drilled section is monitored in real time using instruments that measure pressure, temperature, mud density, penetration speed, and the composition of the extracted material. Modern drilling is a combination of brute force, precision electronics, and continuous control. As the well progresses, steel linings called casing are installed. These pipes are cemented against the rock to isolate different geological layers, protect surface aquifers, and ensure that the gas flow remains confined within a safe structure. Without this lining, the well would be vulnerable to leaks, collapses, and cross-contamination between formations. Each finished section thus becomes a more robust and stable conduit. In many current fields, especially in unconventional reservoirs, drilling is not limited to a vertical line. Once the target depth is reached, the trajectory can curve until it continues horizontally for hundreds or even thousands of meters. This technique allows for increased contact with the productive rock and improves well performance. In certain cases, hydraulic fracturing is also applied, a procedure that injects water, sand, and additives at high pressure to open microfractures in the formation and facilitate the movement of trapped gas toward the well. When the productive zone is reached and the well is completed, extraction begins. The gas rises driven by the reservoir's own pressure or through auxiliary systems. However, what comes to the surface is still far from being a fuel ready for consumption. The flow may include formation water, droplets of liquid hydrocarbons, solid particles, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and in certain reservoirs, hydrogen sulfide. It is a valuable energy stream, but also unstable, corrosive, and potentially dangerous. Therefore, around the well, there are not only valves and pipes, there are also safety equipment, initial separators, emergency flares, leak sensors, pressure relief systems, and strict operating protocols. The objective is twofold. On one hand, to capture the largest possible volume of gas. On the other, to do so under conditions of absolute control. At this stage, natural gas ceases to be a geological reserve and enters the industrial circuit for the first time. It cannot yet power a city, but the long process that will turn it into usable energy has already begun. Once the gas reaches the surface, a decisive phase begins. Extraction has already occurred, but the product obtained is not yet suitable to feed a domestic network or a power plant. The so-called wellhead gas is a complex mixture. Within it, methane coexists with water vapor, fine sand, salts, liquid hydrocarbons, and undesirable gases. If this stream were sent directly into a pipeline, the consequences would be severe. Moisture would favor corrosion and the formation of hydrates. Solids would erode valves and compressors. Acidic compounds would damage pipes. And the variable composition would make its combustion inefficient and dangerous. The first step consists of primary separation. For this, pressure vessels designed to divide the mixture according to density and physical behavior are used. In three-phase separators, the incoming flow reduces its speed and organizes into three streams. Water accumulates at the bottom. An intermediate layer holds condensates or associated liquids, similar to light hydrocarbons. The gaseous phase concentrates in the upper zone. This process seems simple, but it requires fine control of pressure, temperature, and internal level to function without losses. The water removed at this stage is not just any waste. It usually contains salts, chemical compounds, and traces of hydrocarbons, so it must be treated before disposal or re-injection. Condensates, for their part, represent a valuable byproduct. They can be stabilized and sent to other refining or commercialization chains. Meanwhile, the gas continues moving toward new cleaning phases. After primary separation, the next problem is residual moisture. Although much of the liquid water has already been removed, the gas can still contain vapor in sufficient quantities to cause complications. If it is compressed or cooled during transport, that moisture can condense and form crystals or hydrates capable of obstructing entire lines. To avoid this, the gas passes through dehydration units. One of the most common uses glycols, especially triethylene glycol. The wet gas comes into contact with this hygroscopic liquid, which absorbs the water and allows the methane to continue much drier. The glycol is then regenerated by heating and reused in a continuous circuit. In more demanding processes, especially when the gas must meet very strict specifications or be prepared for liquefaction, molecular sieves are used. These solid materials have a microporous structure capable of retaining water with great efficiency. The result is an extremely dry gas, suitable for subsequent high-demand industrial stages. But moisture is not the only enemy of the system. Many fields produce what is known as sour gas, that is, a stream with the presence of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. Carbon dioxide reduces heating value and can form corrosive compounds in the presence of water. Hydrogen sulfide is even more problematic. It is toxic, corrosive, and dangerous even at low concentrations. Its removal is indispensable. To do this, the gas passes through sweetening units where it comes into contact with amine solutions. These solutions selectively absorb acidic gases, allowing the methane to proceed with much higher purity. The amines are then regenerated in another section of the plant, releasing the captured compounds and returning to the operational cycle. The treatment of hydrogen sulfide does not end with its separation. In many facilities, this compound is processed through sulfur recovery units, such as the Claus process. There it is transformed into elemental sulfur, a usable industrial product in the manufacture of fertilizers, chemicals, and other materials. In this way, a dangerous impurity becomes a commercial byproduct. Once the acidic gases are controlled, the plant can focus on another goal: adjusting the energy composition of the gas. Not everything traveling alongside methane is useless. Ethane, propane, butanes, and other heavier hydrocarbons, known as natural gas liquids, or NGLs, may also appear in the stream. Depending on the commercial destination of the product, the plant may decide to leave them partially in the mixture or extract them in cryogenic or absorption units. These components are valuable because they serve as petrochemical raw materials, liquefied fuels, or industrial inputs. Correct separation allows for the optimization of both the quality of the gas sold and the economic utilization of the reservoir. At this stage, the presence of nitrogen, mercury, and traces of other compounds is also controlled. Mercury, even if it appears in minimal amounts, can damage aluminum equipment used in certain cryogenic plants. Therefore, some facilities incorporate specific adsorbent beds to capture it before it causes operational problems. Everything is oriented toward the same end, converting an irregular and aggressive stream into a homogeneous, stable, and safe fuel. The processing plant functions as a massive multi-level filter. Nothing enters or leaves without measurement. Inline analyzers verify composition, water content, pressure, temperature, and heating value. Automatic valves regulate flow rates. Distributed control systems monitor the entire installation second by second. If a variable deviates, the plant corrects immediately or isolates the compromised section. Safety is not an add-on. It is the central axis of the entire operation. When this phase ends, the change is total. The gas that came out of the subsoil as a wet, dirty, and variable mixture has been transformed into a clean, dry stream adjusted to precise specifications. It is no longer just an extracted hydrocarbon. It is an industrial energy product. It has chemical stability, controlled heating value, and suitable conditions to enter the large-scale transport system. At this point, the natural gas already possesses the necessary quality to leave the plant and begin the journey that will take it to entire regions. Although the gas is already clean and ready from a chemical point of view, it still faces an obvious physical problem. In a gaseous state, it occupies a large volume. To move massive quantities over long distances, it is necessary to reduce that relative volume and maintain a continuous flow within the network. Here begins the compression and transport stage, one of the most important in the entire energy chain. The gas leaves the treatment plant and enters compression stations equipped with turbines, motors, and centrifugal or reciprocating compressors. This equipment raises the flow pressure to propel it through the pipelines. Without compression, the gas would lose speed and displacement capacity as it moves through the network. With controlled compression, however, it can travel hundreds or thousands of kilometers while maintaining a constant flow rate. Along the major energy corridors, several stations are distributed that periodically restore pressure and ensure the continuity of supply. Pipelines are industrial structures of enormous scale. They are built with special steels, high-integrity welds, anti-corrosion coatings, and cathodic protection systems to prolong their useful life. They traverse mountains, plains, deserts, rivers, and urban areas. Inside, the gas moves at high speed, but always within carefully monitored parameters. Sensors distributed along the line detect pressure, flow rate, and temperature. Telemetry and remote control systems allow sectioning valves to be opened or closed in seconds. The goal is to maintain continuous operation and at the same time react immediately to any anomaly. Not all gas travels solely by land pipeline. When it must cross oceans or supply regions very far from large fields, an even more extreme technology comes into play: liquefied natural gas, or LNG. To produce it, the processed gas is gradually cooled to around -160 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, methane changes from gas to liquid. This change of state reduces the volume approximately 600 times. This fact completely transforms logistics. What would be very difficult to transport in large quantities in a gaseous state can be loaded into specialized tanks in a liquid state and sent in LNG carriers to any part of the world. Liquefaction plants are giant complexes where cooling occurs in several stages using refrigerants, heat exchangers, and highly efficient thermodynamic cycles. Everything must function with extreme precision because any variation in temperature or pressure can affect the efficiency of the process. Once liquefied, LNG is stored in large insulated cryogenic tanks and then transferred to ships designed to maintain ultra-low temperatures during voyages of thousands of kilometers. When these ships arrive at a destination terminal, the work is still not finished. The LNG can be kept stored as a strategic reserve or immediately passed to regasification units. There, it is heated in a controlled manner until it returns to a gaseous state. Afterward, its pressure is adjusted and it is injected into the local transport network. Thus, a field located a continent away can end up supplying a coastal city on the other side of the planet. Storage is another critical piece of the system. Natural gas consumption changes according to the season, temperature, and industrial demand. In winter, the need can skyrocket for heating and power generation. In milder periods, demand drops. To balance these oscillations, the industry uses surface tanks, salt caverns, depleted reservoirs, and aquifers adapted as underground storage. These reserves allow gas to be accumulated when supply is abundant and released when the network needs it urgently. Without storage, the system would be much more vulnerable to consumption peaks or supply interruptions. Before reaching consumers, the gas passes through regulation and measurement stations. There, its pressure is gradually reduced to adapt it to regional, urban, and industrial networks. The same fuel that travels at high pressure through a large pipeline cannot enter a home that way. It needs to pass through successive stages of reduction and control. In parallel, its volume and, in many cases, its equivalent energy are measured, because what is actually commercialized is not just the quantity of gas, but the useful energy capacity. In this final stretch, an essential operation for public safety also occurs: odorization. Pure natural gas is colorless and almost odorless. A leak under those conditions would be much harder to detect. Therefore, odorant compounds are added in minimal but easily perceptible concentrations. That intense and characteristic smell is not naturally present. It is incorporated deliberately so that any leak is immediately noticed in homes, businesses, or industrial facilities. From that moment on, the network branches out. Large ducts feed regional systems. From there, urban lines depart, then neighborhood networks, and finally individual connections that reach boilers, stoves, ovens, turbines, dryers, petrochemical processes, and power plants. The complete journey has been gigantic, from deep rock to controlled flame, from an unstable geological mixture to energy metered with precision. In homes, the result seems modest. A burner ignites, a shower delivers hot water, a heater maintains the indoor temperature, but behind that apparent simplicity lies a colossal infrastructure. In industry, natural gas feeds high-temperature furnaces, dryers, reactors, and continuous thermal systems. In power generation, it moves turbines capable of supplying millions of people. In petrochemicals, it also acts as a raw material for fertilizers, hydrogen, methanol, and numerous essential compounds of the modern economy.